Well, hello everybody. My name is Dee Dee Regatos from miraclesofmind.tv, and today we're going to be speaking with my very special guest, James D. Dayley. Hello, James.
Hello, how are you, Dee Dee?
Great, thank you. Sorry, folks, we've got a little bit of a lag with Skype, but no problem. So the reason I've invited James here today is because the CIA has recently released 13 million files available online from everything from researching the paranormal to psychic abilities, the Stargate program, former US presidents, and even UFOs. But James, as we know from one of our past interviews, which you can access on miraclesofmind.tv, is a very good friend and adventurer with the Uri Geller. And many of these files have to do with the CIA and the American Defense Department having studied Uri Geller. So we're here today to talk about all those studies done with James and the fascinating things that have been revealed by those files being released. So James, tell us, I know that at the time it was classified information, but at the same time, Uri being your very good friend, you must have shared some interesting adventures with him and the CIA and him working for the CIA. Tell us about some of those adventures.
Well, and it's so true. He did reveal some of the stories with me. I mean, and there's been many books that have been written about that, which you can see on Uri Geller's website, urigeller.com. But one story that came to mind when the news came out about all of this was Uri would give me a call whenever he was in town, and he gave me a call one day and said that he was speaking at the United Nations for the General Assembly, and asked if I wanted to come to the show, that it was, that there were some security precautions, so I had to give my name and everything in advance. So we went down to the show, and afterwards I met with him, and he came up to me and said, "James, what is it about you?" And I said, "What?" And he says, "Every time you come to one of my shows, it's always the person seated next to you that gives some sort of sense of something happens." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he pointed out that a guy's keys bent in San Diego, and I said, "Well, what happened here?" And he said, "Well, remember that funny-looking guy with the bow tie and the white hair that sat next to you?" And I went, "Yeah, I remember." He said, "Well, the whole reason why I was doing this lecture is that," or he went on to say, "the CIA asked him to come and do a lecture at the United Nations because they wanted to see what countries took psychic phenomenon serious and which ones looked at it as just a parlor trick." So, and the interesting thing is all of the Israeli higher staff was there, all of the Russians and the Japanese were there. The other countries, there were just people that were amazed by Uri's reputation and the phenomenon. But it turns out the guy seated next to me, he went on to say that the CIA said he was the person of interest because his visa stated that he was the chauffeur for the Soviet embassy to the United Nations. But oddly enough, he never sat in the front seat. He always sat in the back of the limousines. So they knew that unofficially he was actually the head of the KGB in the United States.
Wow.
When Uri's book, The Geller Effect, came out in the early 80s, I was blown away because there's actually a photograph of him bending a spoon at the lecture. And you can see me seated in the third row back, and I'm the only one kind of seated half back in my seat. Everyone else is at the edge of their seat watching Uri bend a key. But it was really quite interesting, and Uri has many, many stories that he's told me over the years about his involvement with the CIA in Mexico City and different stories to that effect. Anyway.
I understand that the Mexican president, because of some of his work and being tested there, actually granted him a citizenship of Mexico because of his work, which is absolutely amazing. He was so impressed by him.
That is true. In fact, he gave him all types of presents. And one of the interesting stories that Uri told me about that was how he met the president. Was the president's wife was a huge fan. And it turned out, and this is one of the stories, in fact, I don't know if it's really been released, but and one of the things is Uri didn't do kidnapping cases because he was afraid of what he might see or explore. But he was contacted by the president of Mexico because one of their high officials was kidnapped, and Uri said, "Get me some helicopters," and he got up, flew around, kind of pointed in a direction, said, "That building." And he said, "But get out of here because they can sense that we're here. But that's where I think they're holding him." And it was a building way out in the middle of the desert. It took them a while to get a task force to go in to sneak up on that building. When they found the building, they found that that was in fact where they were holding the kidnapped victim. But when they heard the helicopters, they found the man wandering the desert a day later. And he said that at one point the kidnappers got paranoid and took off. And he finally broke loose of his binds and was trying to find civilization when they discovered him, which is one of the interesting tales. And from that point forward, the president of Mexico became a dear friend of Ori's and did give him dual citizenship at one point.
I mean, the things that he talks about, I listened to a recent interview by Yuri himself, and the things, I mean, what a life. So apparently the CIA would, when there were Russians, and I believe they were leaving from Mexico, they were Russian spies, and they would place Yuri behind them on the plane. And back in the day, they used to record on floppy disks, and Yuri would sit there and say, "Erase, erase, erase." And we have to assume that he was able, all these guys collect all this great spy information, and the US CIA just places Yuri behind them and says, "Erase," and all their info is gone. So I thought that was really a funny story.
Ori told me that what happened at Stanford when they did the original test, and what actually brought the test to a conclusion, was that they gave him a cassette tape, an audio tape that was pre-recorded, and asked him to erase it. And he focused his energy, and suddenly bells and alarms started going off. And it was actually the tape that he was working on, nothing happened to it, but computer tapes that were in the basement of that building that were holding information for the CIA started erasing.
Oh, wow.
And they stopped the test immediately at that point because of that. I know that when I was in Miami working with Andy Gibb, we went to see one of Ori's show, and we invited him back to Criteria Recording Studios afterwards, and Ori was excited to go back. The Eagles were finishing Hotel California up in Studio B, and we were just laying down basic tracks for Andy Gibb's record and his first album in the U.S., and Ori stopped and said, "Nope, I better not," and he told us that story, and didn't come back to the studio. But it's interesting how that all works. But there's also another tale that actually they made a movie about. The movie Falcon and the Snowman. You may remember that from I think it was the 80s. Sean Penn and I can't remember the other actor's name right now. But the movie was Falcon and the Snowman, and it was a major U.S. case where they busted some spies. And evidently what happened was one of the tasks that they gave Ori to do would be to circle the Soviet embassy and try to pick up dates or information. They asked him what was in a special room, and he said that all he could tell was it was a bunch of electronical equipment. And after a couple of visits, and Ori told me this personally, he said, "Is any of this information I'm giving you work?" And they came back. And if a source proves to be authentic, or we get valuable information to them. And this is our third visit.
Wow. Okay.
So that kind of made it clear to him what they were saying. But in that movie, what happened was Ori gave them a date. He says, "I don't know what's important about this date, but you need to be at the embassy on this particular date." And in the movie Falcon and the Snowman, it's a story. Sean Penn is getting paid off by the Russians by sneaking information to him. And he shows up he shows up at the embassy, banging on the gates, demanding his money. Well, the Russian embassy would have many dinners and banquets, but the U.S. would never show up for that particular date. They told the ambassador to the United States, "Go there." And the ambassador to the United States happened to be there. It was a coincidence, and he was wondering why an American citizen was banging on the gates to the Soviet Union demanding money. And that's what opened up that whole investigation, which spawned the movie later on, Falcon and the Snowman.
How very interesting. So some of the research that came out of Stanford as well that made the CIA believers was when they put Yuri into a Faraday cage. And for those of you who don't know what a Faraday cage is, it's impenetrable. It's like being in a lead cage, no form of electronics, no internet, nothing can get through that. And Yuri was saying how they do a body search before you go in, and they make sure you have nothing with you. And from miles away to thousands of miles away, they would have one CIA operative draw something, and Yuri had to tap in. And they just randomly picked something out of a dictionary, and they came up with the word bunch. So the CIA operative drew a bunch of grapes. And then Yuri consequently drew exactly 24 grapes, which was exactly how many grapes that operative had drawn. So, I mean, you cannot disprove his ability when you do studies like that are that airtight.
A lot of magicians and people have come up with methods to duplicate that, but those type of tests were just completely unheard of. I mean, and SIR did a lot of other research. They worked with a lot of other people doing different types of things. But yeah, the grapes was really interesting. A lot of the pictures that he drew. One that I found that was really interesting that was published in one of his books was, I think they drew a picture of the devil, and he couldn't draw the picture. He kept drawing other things, and it's really quite interesting. In fact, I think a lot of these studies, and you can watch some of the videos right on Uri's webpage.
Yeah, fascinating. But now, for those of you who want to hear more about some of James' adventures with Uri Geller, and you're going to see James bending a spoon live on our interview, as well as many other miracles he's seen as a result of hypnotists, please tune in to miraclesofmind.tv, and you're just going to get the full in-depth interview. So, James, thank you for being with us here today. You have a great day, and we'll speak to you soon, my friend.
Great. I hope to see you soon, too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.